Hey everyone, System Coral here. I wanted to talk about a topic today that I was planning, those who've been following me know that I've been planning on talking for a while, and I am going to preface this with a trigger warning. I'm going to be talking about endometriosis, so what that involves is I'm going to be talking a lot about my reproductive system, just the organs up here, reproductive system, miscarriages, and loss of babies, and I think that's about it. Oh, surgery. I'm going to be talking about surgeries. So if that is something that will trigger you, feel free to click off next and you guys can check out the next video I do. But getting into this video, endometriosis is a reproductive disorder that causes the lining inside of the uterus to grow outside of the uterus. And what that means that it can cause endometriotic cysts, which are little brown fluid-filled cysts on your ovaries. And also it can cause very big painful lesions on your organs, usually the uterus, but I will explain other things that can happen with endometriosis too. Now, it's not an uncommon disorder. More than 200,000 cases of endometriosis happen per year, and that is numbers done by the Mayo Clinic. If endometriosis is not treated properly, it can lead to infertility, severe pelvic pain, adhesions, which are the little things that grow on your organs, cysts, and more complications can arise. In some cases, it's not extremely common, but in some cases it can be life-threatening, especially for if you have more bleeding than others. One of the most common symptoms of endometriosis is irregular periods, including severe bleeding. And in some women, the bleeding can become so severe that they need blood transfusions, or blood loss can become a very big issue. For me, it causes me anemia. Other life-threatening issues can be if the adhesions causes the organs to fuse together, you might need partial organ removal, things like that, but they aren't too common, but still can happen. Causing your organs to fuse, what that means is the adhesions are sticky open wounds that end up scarring over, and the scar tissue can cause a lot of damage. Now, when the adhesions are there, it can cause two organs to fuse, or the organ to fuse in place, which can cause a lot of issues. So some people, for example, I have one friend who had to get part of her bowel removed because the endometriosis adhesions caused part of her bowel to fuse together and the scar tissue damaged it. I'll talk a little bit about DIE later, which is DIE, it's an acronym. I'll talk a little bit about that later when I talk about where my surgery. So the most common symptoms are, first of all, your cramps. They are horrible. Heavy bleeding or irregular periods. Back pain is another thing that's extremely common. Pain from the cysts rupturing. And I want to talk a little bit about my experience with it. I first had my first period when I was 12. and I noticed something was a little bit off, but everyone chalked it up to, oh, it's supposed to be that way. When I first got it when I was 12, I noticed that I never had a consistent period. My period, I'd be bleeding heavily for 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks and a half was the longest I think the longest period I've ever had was 2 weeks and a half. My cramps were so severe that I'd end up vomiting from pain. Not able to move. I'd stay homesick often, or if I was made to go to school, I'd be in the nurse most of the day because I just couldn't move because they hurt so bad. And the bleeding. One of the signs that doctors tell you to look out for when they're checking for endometriosis is that if you're continuously changing your pads, or if you're bleeding through pads, because you're supposed to change your pad every 4 hours, or you can do it sooner, but they say you should at least change your pad every 4 hours. And one of the warning signs they look out for is if you're changing pads every hour or less than every hour. And I would be bleeding very heavily to the point where I had to be on iron pills for anemia, because when I would get on my period, I would become so anemic that I would spend my whole menstrual cycle, I would spend my whole period sick and in bed, because every time I tried to get up, I would end up passing out. When I turned 13, I finally talked to my parents again about it, and I asked to be put on birth control. And so when I turned 13, I was put on the pill. And what it is, in my case, there's 3 weeks of the actual hormonal birth control, and then 1 sugar pill week. That's usually how birth controls work. Now for me, in my case, because my period symptoms were so severe, I would skip the sugar pill week, and I would just take the hormonal birth control weeks, which doctors will let you do. So I was just strictly taking that and not having a period. 4 years ago, sorry, I was put on Nexplanon because of my memory issues. I would forget to take my medication sometimes. And what Nexplanon is you can kind of see my scar from getting it removed, but it's a little tube that they inject into your arm, just under the skin, and it can last for 3 years. Now, they do suggest for endometriosis that you stay on birth control. It doesn't really matter too much what kind. I'm on norethindrone, I think it's called. But the treatment for endometriosis is being on birth control. But when I was put on Nexplanon, I did not have, for some people who have periods, when they're put on Nexplanon, they don't get bleeding. They don't bleed at all. And that's common for every type of birth control. For some people who go on it, they just don't bleed or have period symptoms. For me, I would still have the severe cramps, although they did lessen a bit, but I would still have pretty severe cramps. I would still have premenstrual syndrome symptoms, but I did not bleed. Now, I did have breakthrough bleeding at some points because endometriosis can cause irregular periods. I was never able to pinpoint my period. So for the 3 years I was on it, I would have to carry pads on me all the time because sometimes I would just randomly bleed. But I do recommend Nexplanon because it's for those who have issues with memory and taking medication, because it was good. I was one of the rare people that had complications on it, but it used a very good birth control. So while I was on the Nexplanon, like I said, I was one of the rare people who had complications with it. I suffered 2 miscarriages on it. Now, endometriosis is known to cause issues with infertility, especially if left untreated. Now at this point, I just got diagnosed with endometriosis this year. I've been having periods since I was 12. You can do the math. That long it was left untreated, that long it took for it to spread. And my first miscarriage, I didn't know I was pregnant. My partner speculated it, but I didn't know until I had the miscarriage. I went to the hospital, and the doctor came in with the pregnancy, after the pregnancy test, and told me that I was miscarrying, which came as a shock since I didn't know anything was there. And I think at that point I was about 3 months, which isn't uncommon in my family. The people in my family haven't really found out they were pregnant until pretty far along. And I didn't really have that bad of symptoms because most of my symptoms I were having a pregnancy were symptoms I have of my disabilities. So I didn't really tell the difference. I was throwing up a lot, which I do because I have chronic pain syndrome anyway. Cravings, I usually crave when I'm on my cycle. And those were the only 2 symptoms I was having. My second miscarriage I had last year I ran away from home, and I ran away in May, and it was the end of June when I got a positive pregnancy test. That one I did know I was pregnant. And by that time, the Nexplanon had already expired, and it was time for me to remove it. And I was 3 weeks. Now for both pregnancies, I was not on any psychiatric medications. I stopped my psychiatric medications because they were not helping me. So I wasn't taking anything that could have caused these miscarriages. And the hospital I was going to was very confused because I appear to be a semi-healthy besides POTS, but my reproductive system seemed to be healthy, but I was suffering miscarriages. And the second miscarriage I had, I lost the baby at 3 weeks. That one they speculate was a chemical pregnancy, which means that my baby rejected itself, pretty much. After I had my second miscarriage, I went to my OBGYN, and I was telling her about all these issues and saying that at the time I was 19. I said, I'm 19 years old. I have been having all these period issues. I shouldn't be miscarrying at 19 years old. I want to have laparoscopic surgery to see if I do have endometriosis, since reproductive issues do run in my family. They kept on saying, no, you're fine. And finally, I annoyed them enough where they finally gave in and did it. I had my laparoscopic surgery, I'm actually not sure. I think I had it in May of this year. I'm pretty sure I had it in May of this year. And when I had my laparoscopic surgery, I wasn't allowed to eat and drink for the night before. I still have the scars from it. They stuck a camera in my belly button, and they stuck 2 cameras on the side. And what they do is they go through your organs and they check for endometriosis or any other possible issues. And what they found was a lot of endometriosis and some damage. They found that one of my fallopian tubes is so full of scar tissue from the endometriosis, it's actually non-functional. And the other one is partially damaged itself. So if I want to have children in the future, I'm going to need fertility drugs and or might not be able to have children. They also found DIE, which is deep infiltrating endometriosis. What deep infiltrating endometriosis is, it is when the endometriosis has spread to other organs in or outside the pelvis. So usually endometriosis is outside of the uterine wall, but when it spreads to other organs, that is called deep infiltrating endometriosis. For me, it is along my back, deep in my pelvis, so near my back, which they think is causing that, and the joint pain is what causes my severe back pain and issues walking. It is also all along my bladder, which causes 24/7 UTI symptoms and makes using the bathroom extremely difficult. I also have it all on my ovaries and, of course, my uterus. And they put me on a medication that will hopefully stop the growth, but I do have to get ultrasounds and internal and external ultrasounds every 3 months, and if they do sense any sort of growth or worsening, I will have to go on a medication to induce a temporary menopause to preserve my fertility, if there's any left. So that is what they found when I was on the surgery. The surgery was surprisingly not as bad as I thought it'd be. The recovery wasn't as painful, and I was in pain for about 2 days, but then after that, besides the issue that I have issues with sutures healing, I didn't have any complications, luckily. Unfortunately, what it means for the future is I am 20 years old and I have to worry about if I'll be able to have children, which is not something a 20-year-old should have to worry about. But for now, me and my doctor's plans are to keep me on the medication, and if we sense any growth, if we think there is any growth, I will have to be induced temporary menopause, and I might have to undergo in vitro fertilization if I want to have kids. We can try that. We can try surrogate. We can try adoption. I'm not sure yet. I think my doctor said the option I'll probably have to do is in vitro fertilization, but it might not work, in which case then I'll probably have to either get a surrogate or adopt. But at this point, there's not a cure for endometriosis. More often than not, women or people with endometriosis usually end up having to get their a hysterectomy and an oophorectomy. What that means is a hysterectomy is removal of the uterus. Oophorectomy is removal of ovaries. And usually people with endometriosis have to get that done. And even when that's done, if they don't get all of the endometriotic tissue, it's still going to spread. There are 4 stages of endometriosis. I personally am not sure which stage I am in. I think I'm 3. I'm pretty sure they told me that I'm stage 3. Again, me being stage 3 or going into stage 4 doesn't mean that I'm dying. It just means that I have the short end of the stick when it comes to endometriosis. And it just means that my spreading is very far along, and I have a lot of pain and complications. It also, with my endometriosis, they found that I have cysts all on my ovaries, and they have issues rupturing, which is extremely painful. In the future, what it does mean is that since my insurance doesn't cover trans surgeries, it does mean that since I do have endometriosis, I can get my hysterectomy and oophorectomy covered under medical necessity rather than elective surgery, which is good in an insurance sense, since I wanted it before I found out I had endo, but also it sucks because that's where I am in my life. It comes with a lot of fears for the future. I am constantly worried of what's going on in me. I'm constantly worried if will I ever be able to have kids of my own. I'm constantly afraid of will I have issues tomorrow and will I find out my organs are fusing together? Will I have to get part of my organs removed down the line because of the scar tissue is deep infiltrating, meaning it's on my other organs now. I'm constantly worried of my bladder function. Will I have to end up getting surgery on my bladder because it has issues functioning now? It's something that causes a lot of concern, but ultimately they do have ways of treating it to the best of their abilities, but there is no end-all be-all treatment for endometriosis. I'll probably be on birth control for a very long time. I'll probably be in menopause very early in my life. And I'll probably end up having to get a lot of surgeries down the road. But although this is not the happiest video, I thought it was a good thing to talk about since I didn't have my surgery too long ago. I was going to make this after my surgery, but life happens. If anyone has any questions about endo, you're welcome to reach out to me. If you are going through it, you're not alone, and there are options and treatment options out there, and there is always hope, and hopefully doctors will find a cure for it soon. Thank you for watching the video, and I hope to see you guys again soon.